Hey everyone, welcome to Eternal Basics. My name is Pocho, and today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We've discussed so far a lot of different ways to execute on our particular strategies. We want to build decks that have enough power to accomplish their goals. We want to make sure that they have good cards that build advantage in board, in hand, in all the different ways, and do it in such a way that's efficient and effective, and make sure that we execute on a specific, consistent theme. Now, today what we're going to be talking about is playing not our deck, but playing against our opponent's deck, and making sure that our opponent can't execute their strategy in the way that we're executing ours, because Eternal is, after all, a very interactive game. And much of what you're going to be doing is not going to be so much concerned with how your deck works, but with how your opponent's deck works against you and how you work against your opponent. To that extent, we're going to talk about important cards to influence your opponent and to influence their strategy, and to make sure that your strategy does, by default, go off with less hitches as a result of us having a disruptive style of play. And that's going to be our focus for this particular video. So the thing that we're going to talk about the most here is removal. There are two different types of removal that we usually categorize. The first is hard removal, the most common example of which is Deathstrike, which is just the standard kill a unit. It goes to the void. It's no longer a problem for you at all. Hard removal tends to get rid of a unit in a way that is very, very effective and simple. It's usually is pretty expensive as a result, or it's somewhat conditional, such as Annihilate, which only kills a single faction, or Suffocate, which only kills a unit with 3 or less. There are all sorts of different types of removal. They're extremely powerful effects, and they're most common in Shadow, although every single color will have them. And the more removal that you can get into a deck, or rather, if you can get a decent amount of removal into any deck, it increases the consistency of your deck by quite a lot, because removal allows you to get rid of things in your opponent's deck that are key parts of his strategy and key parts of his ways to win. So, in addition to hard removal, there's also soft removal. We have silences, which remove the abilities and keywords from a unit, but don't remove the unit itself. We have stun effects, like Flash Freeze, which make sure that a unit can't attack or block, but don't disable the unit's abilities, and don't necessarily remove it completely from the game. Cards like Ice Sprite and Permafrost are a little bit better at being soft removal. They often function as close to hard removal as you can get. But we're going to use Flash Freeze here because our deck is a Haunting Scream archetype, and it actually happens to have like a decent amount of benefit from that. So any type of fast spell, any type of removal spell or combat trick, as we call them, such as Rapid Shot. Most fast spells actually are considered combat tricks. These cards tend to have a lot of advantage, not just due to their ability to evenly trade with anything that your opponent has, card for card, but also due to their ability to surprise and in some ways completely turn fights in your favor. So as an example, the card Annihilate seems like a pretty simple trade, right? We spend 2 to kill a unit with a single faction. But if we're in an attacking situation where we have a 4/4 unit that we really want to get through, or that we really need to... We have a 4/4 unit, and they have a 3/3 and a 2/2, and they block with those 2 units. And what would normally happen is the 4/4 would kill the 3/3, it would leave the 2/2 alive, and then the 4/4 would die. You trade 1 for 1, and it wouldn't be a very good trade, because you'd be trading one of your bigger units for a lighter unit. But if you get into that situation, you declare your attacks, and then your opponent declares his blockers, and the fight is about to happen, and you suddenly annihilate the 2/2 or the 3/3, then now it's a 4/4 versus a 2/2, and the 4/4 will of course kill the 2/2. So that gives you a 2-for-1 trade, with the Annihilate removing 2 different units with the aid of your other unit. And this kind of surprise attack, these fast effects, these tricks, are really, really influential on the course of a fight and should be very highly valued. You should always look at fast spells with a degree of with a measured degree of importance. They are actually really effective abilities. It's important to have at least some tricks in order to do that kind of situation. I mean, as an example, the flash freeze can do a similar thing. Like if you stun a unit that is double blocking, then you get another unit just picked up for free. So if you manage to stun a 2/2, then the 2/2 will be removed from combat and the 3/3 will go down. So these kinds of fast effects are really, really effective at playing disruptively and making sure that your opponent doesn't get his stuff off. To that extent, you want to hold on to them, and you want to make sure that you use them at the right times. It's very easy to blow these effects very, very early on when it seems most efficient to do so, but if you save these effects, because they are very, very powerful, for the right times, and if you begin to recognize these right times, you can turn a lot of fights that would otherwise not be in your favor to your favor. Alright, so to that extent, let's talk about the deck. Today's deck is a Haunting Scream deck. It's a variation on the Infiltrate deck that we ran in Eternal Basics number 5, the Shadow deck. And we have that same bevy of Infiltrate units. We have Lethrai Ranger, we have Desperado. There's no Beast Caller's Amulets this time because most of the units already have inbuilt Infiltrates. And we've added a hybrid card that's very, very effective, a really powerful one called Gorgon Fanatic. Gorgon Fanatic is a 3/2 that when it infiltrates, you sacrifice it to draw 3 cards and gain 3 health. So if you get this through, you get essentially 3 damage, 3 cards, and 3 health. Obviously, the requirement here is pretty terrific. You have to actually get Fanatic through, but it's such a tremendous advantage that it can turn most games specifically in your favor. And it's a really, really relevant card if you can get it across. To get it across, we are running a lot of different stuff. First off, we're running plenty of hard removal, of course. We have Suffocates and Annihilates, we have Deathstrikes. We also have a little bit of counter removal in the form of Backlash, making sure that Fanatic doesn't get killed ahead of time. And we have some combat tricks, so that Fanatic can attack in, and if it does get blocked, we can keep it alive for a turn and kill the unit that's blocking it using Rapid Shot, which gives a unit +4 attack and Quick Draw. Now, this of course will just kill pretty much anything. It'll do 7 damage, the unit will die, and it won't be able to deal combat damage back. Finally, we also have cards like Flash Freeze and Levitate, and Ghostform, which gives a unit lifesteal and unblockable. All of these serve to get our unit across and make sure that it gets its infiltrate off at least once, because that infiltrate effect tends to be very, very powerful. And it's not just Fanatic. We have Cabal Recruiter here, which plays the top unit of the enemy deck. We have Lethrai Ranger, which gives that +2/+2, giving you a 4/4 for 2. Really, really exciting card value in terms of size. And we have Desperado, which kills an enemy unit if it succeeds in infiltrating. Finally, at the very top, we have that rare that's included in the Shadow list, Argenport Ringmaster, just for kicks. Plays 5 random units from the enemy void. If you get this through after removing a bunch of your opponent's units, this tends to be a game winner. So all of this... Oh, and there is Swiftblade as well, Deadly and Quick Draw. For those of you who don't know, Deadly and Quick Draw, when you use them together, the deadly damage means that your unit only needs to deal 1 damage to any blocker to kill it, and combined with Quick Draw, you can get a Swiftblade into a situation where it's blocked by, I don't know, 3 2/2s, and it'll kill 2 of the 2/2s with 1 damage each. The other 2/2 will be the only one that gets to deal damage back because of the Quick Draw, and it won't be able to kill the Swiftblade. So you'll get a 2-for-0 exchange on Swiftblade. So Swiftblade is a card that is almost unblockable if it gets its infiltrate off. In addition to all of our disruption, all of our ways to actually sneak through, we have Haunting Scream, which plays a unit with cost 4 or less from the void and gives it charge and flying. You sacrifice it at the end of turn. This card has a lot of synergy with Gorgon Fanatic because the sacrifice effect doesn't matter. If you get Fanatic through on a Haunting Scream, it's going to be sacrificed anyways, so you get rid of a drawback of Haunting Scream, while also getting another 3 cards and 3 health, and 3 damage of course. So all of this works out really well. Haunting Scream also gives a unit charge and flying, and this is another cool interaction where cards that go into the void keep stats that they are given and keep changes that are made to the card. So if you give a card Haunting Scream and it has charge and flying, then when you later on pull it back with a card like Dark Return, which draws a unit from the void and gives it +1/+1, it will still have charge and flying. And that's a really important aspect of recursion that tends to make for a really fun trick and a really fun theme to our deck. So yeah, all of this deck really moves together quite well. We have Scheme here to make sure that we hit some of the key cards. Scheme is the new push onward, and it's really, really effective at increasing that level of consistency to the deck. We only run 2 of them because the unit count is a little bit light, because we're running so many disruptive spells. There are actually 31 spells in the deck, and only 19 units. As a general rule, I recommend that most decks run around 22, but because we're focusing very much on disruption, we're going to be running a deck with just a little bit less. Alright, so that's most of what we're talking about with the deck. Let's go into a game and talk a little bit more. Okay, so starting off, we have very few useful cards in our hand. We'll have to redraw this. This is the disadvantage of running a deck that doesn't have that many units in it. You'll sometimes get into a situation where you can't really do anything. I kind of like this hand actually a little bit, because we could just suffocate the first 3 units that my opponent plays and be pretty happy with that. But I think we should probably try to hit at least 1 unit, so let's redraw. Alright, much better. We have Lethrai Ranger at 2, we have a Levitate even in the starter hand, and we have Dark Returns, which tend to be really effective with Lethrai Rangers in particular, because if you get the Infiltrate off, Infiltrates reset after your unit goes into the Void. So a Lethrai Ranger that's put into the Void after it is infiltrated is a 4/4. You Dark Return it, it becomes a 5/5 from the +1/+1. You put it on the board, and it can infiltrate again to get another +2/+2, becoming a 7/7. Really just a lot of fun that way. A fun card to be using. My opponent has a pause here, and we're going to talk a lot about these pauses in the next 2 videos. But what we want to note here is that because we are waiting, we have a pretty good idea that our opponent has a torch. There's only one other option that pause could be, I think, and that is Levitate, which, yeah, it looks like was not a thing that happened. So we'll play down a Gorgon Swiftblade here. We need that 3rd power to get things really rolling. The 3rd power enables Desperado and also allows us to do Dark Return into Lethrai Ranger, which is pretty useful. It is my opponent's turn now. We're not waiting for his turn, but he's considering again. We've already lost a torch here, and it looks like my opponent is in Skycrag colors, which is red and blue, or fire and primal. Alright, so immediately we already see that my opponent doesn't have a card here to stop us. He might be holding onto a torch, he might be holding onto some sort of combat trick, but what he wants us to do is attack first, and we're happy to do that. We got in, everything worked out just fine there. We now have a 2/3 that is deadly and quick draw. I can Levitate here to draw a card and maybe get a power, and I think that I probably should. I could also Dark Return Lethrai Ranger, but that doesn't really look appealing to me. I'm going to Levitate here. And we got a Shadow Sigil, which is exactly what we need. We're going to hold at 2 power here, and we're going to leave up Backlash, because this 2/3 is a very, very important unit to our strategy, and we want to make sure that we can counter any removal cards that might be played. Alright, so what's up with Lord Holt? He's trying to torch this guy. I am perfectly happy to Backlash that torch. He must have just drawn that torch, or else he would have cast it at the end of his turn. Alright, at this point we can attack for 2 pretty easily. And it would be good to play down another unit that can actually get across. I don't think Desperado is super important here, because my opponent doesn't really have a board. Let's Dark Return the Lethrai Ranger, and play down a 3/3. And that 3/3 can, of course, turn into a 5/5 next turn. So the power of these infiltrate units is very, very significant on an empty board. And we're going to find that out quite a lot here. Let's go ahead and scheme. We can pick up a better card here. The Backlash looks really useful, since my opponent seems to be running a lot of nasty spells. Lethrai Ranger is also okay, but I think the Backlash is probably going to be the most important card here. And yeah, we've identified our opponent's strategy, we think. Our opponent seems to be running a deck that uses a lot of control elements and fast spells. Although we've just seen a purple show up, so clearly there's a little bit more to it. Let's go ahead and Suffocate here. Alright, so my opponent could have Lightning Storm, or he could have Black Sky Harbinger, which is a 6-drop that deals quite a bit of damage. Ooh, should I have saved the Suffocate for the Black Sky Harbinger? I don't think that would have been a good idea, but right here we have 7 damage. And that's a pretty significant amount. So we're likely to see a Black Sky Harbinger here, which is a 6-drop that deals 1 damage to each unit. But instead we have a Lightning Storm, and we did in fact keep a Backlash for it. So now my opponent's at 5. And this appears to have gone very well. So those 2 Backlashes prevented my opponent from doing most of his strategy, which involves playing a lot of control elements and then playing like a really, really slow board with Black Sky Harbingers to gain back the health that he loses in the early game. He wants to make sure that our units are controlled and that we are shut down. But we backlashed him twice, and that meant that we kept units on the board for longer than he was capable of dealing with them, and we got a ton of extra advantage out of that. Now, he spent all of his power here, so he no longer has any more tricks, which means that with the Haunting Scream, the Lethrai Ranger will be lethal for us. And voila! Alright, playing a second one here. We've got Firecracker available. This hand, of course, can't be kept. It's only got 1 unit of any value in it. This is much better. We have our Gorgon Fanatic available, we have our Lethrai Ranger and our Swiftblade. The disadvantage here is that the deck doesn't really have any disruption in it, so we really need to get a hold of some of those cards if we want to continue. Now, Lethrai Ranger is an okay blocker here, but I think I'm going to go for the Swiftblade. That'll give us a defense against that Pyro Knight, and it might get torched, we will see. A Warhelm plus a torch. Alright, and you can see my opponent's got a fairly disruptive strategy already as well. Torch is a very, very powerful disruptive card, and part of the reason for that is that it can do stuff to make sure that you can get, like, War Cries across and get damage across. But what we're going to do is we're going to Dark Return the Swiftblade. That way we have something that's immune to torches and also can block this 3-1, which is pretty crucial. And we're just going to try and stand in his way. Looks like we're doing an okay job here. So if I attack for 3, then I get to play down whatever I really want. I think I'm going to attack for 3 here. So if my opponent could still have a torch, and I think it's pretty likely even. I could Levitate the Swiftblade to make sure that it gets across without taking any damage, but I'd actually rather get into a situation where I kill one of his units, because his deck is probably a little bit more aggressive than mine. So we're going to attack for 3 here. And we're going to see either no blocks or a block and then a torch. Looks like no blocks here, so my opponent is really looking to get his stuff across. Now, let's play down a power. And instead of playing Gorgon Fanatic, which is a really powerful card here, we're going to play Lethrai Ranger. And the reason for that is Lethrai Ranger can block this Warcry Overwhelm Pyro Knight. And also because I leave 2 power up for the Backlash. Keeping that power up for the Backlash is important because my opponent's strategy is going to revolve around torching one of my units. Or I could involve putting a Katana on a really big Warcry unit. That's also a possibility. Alright, we block here. And go ahead and let that through. So now I've got a 3-4, he's got a 5-3. That's a rough time. Let's go ahead and put down the Fanatic. And I can't block this 3-5 yet, so we're just going to attack here. I would really like an extra power here for Backlash, because I don't want this to get torched, but we'll see what happens. We take 5. Alright, my opponent's getting mostly unimpeded stuff happening here. I think that I want to attack with both these guys. Yes, I do. And we don't see any sort of removal from him, which means that our Fanatic gets across unimpeded. That's really, really important. The 3 health really helps, and it also gets us into a second Fanatic, which is really, really good. We're going to hold on to the Levitate, because again, we're keeping Backlash up, and again, that 3 health and 3 draw is going to be really important. We might get him to put down a blocker of some kind. Alright, that is a significant amount of damage. We could probably prevent that if we wanted to, but I think that I should stay put. Alright, my opponent's got one spell left. It's a Rampage. We're going to Backlash that so that he doesn't have lethal. And that will put him at 11. Alright, so swinging for 3 here. We want to keep this guy up as a blocker. So we'll attack in, get that health back. We found a Suffocate, which isn't quite what we're looking for. What we need here is some form of other blocker for this Recano Outlaw, or a removal spell. Now, I could Argenport Ringmaster, and that would get me a possible out, but I'd have to block here against either the Outlaw or the Ronin. So it would be wise to put down Fanatic as a blocker. But first things first, let's scheme. Alright, and that works out a little bit better for us, because now we have access to Annihilate, a really important card here. So if we Annihilate the 5/3, then my opponent no longer has a viable path to victory. Instead, he has to basically just hold out with the Oni Ronin until he gets a better spell. And we still have all of these cards in hand. So let's go ahead and we'll leave it be for now. See what my opponent draws. He goes for the 6/4 attack. I will block here with the deadly unit, and the two will trade. And that Pyre Adept is a scary card. Let's Levitate here because we want to draw a few more things if we can get them. Alright, this works out pretty well. Gorgon Fanatic is going to be pretty useful. I'm going to hold on to the Deathstrike because my opponent has a lot of weapons, and I want to see if I can get another weapon out of my opponent's hand. Or a Rampage, or anything of that sort. Alright, we'll block here, and we'll see if he has the Rampage. There's no Rampage yet, so no need to get crazy. We'll just Deathstrike it. And we'll see what my opponent has. Nothing at the moment, so we get to attack in. We get our draws again. And we get a little bit of extra health to play with, which is also important. I don't have another Backlash, so I am still somewhat vulnerable to burn, but the lack of damage that I have taken puts me in a pretty good position here. I'm going to hold up as though I had a Backlash, just pretend that I have it. We won't necessarily have it. And Argenport Ringmaster swings for all 5 units from his Void, and also for the win. And there we go. Because our deck denied our opponent his path to victory, because it prevented the burn from happening to us, even though we were the slower deck, we won that match. And yeah, I think that's a pretty good example. Let's go to the post-mortem. So we played against 2 very different deck archetypes there. The first was a control deck that really wanted to keep the board clear while it got to what assumedly were bigger threats in its hand. And we managed to disrupt that deck by making sure that we got in for damage at key turns and keeping our own units protected. Whereas the other deck was an aggro deck that really wanted to come in as fast as possible and use all of its spells to reduce us to 0. And we made sure that we had enough stuff up defensively, that we used enough spells to get advantage and to make sure that the board was clear enough that that deck ran out of juice before it was able to kill us. And in both instances, removal spells were extremely effective and beneficial to our strategy. But also, we got a lot more use out of Backlash than I was actually expecting to in these videos. A very good card for disrupting decks that are spell-focused and want to get a lot of key stuff in terms of disruption out of your deck. So, the final thing that I would say here is that what we want to do when we are playing against our opponents is to read their strategy. Try and figure out what it is that they're doing. And once we have identified their strategy, we can decide which tools in our hand are most effective and best at countering that strategy. And that's a key part of playing your removal spells correctly and playing your spells correctly in such a fashion that you can actually get the best effect out of the board. That is it for today. We'll be talking more about fast spells next time around. In particular, we're going to be talking about reading our opponent's hands, and we'll probably be running a Stone Scar burn deck. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really had fun with this one, and I hope that you guys have fun out there on the ladder with this deck or with others. And that's all for today. Have a really good night, and I will see you next time.